I'm going to go ahead and get that recording starting as we're queuing up here. Our speaker today has shared some notes with us, and they are already on the website. So if you log into the TJGS website, if you're a member, go to go to documents first, then go to meeting presentations. And when you click on that little folder, it will open up and you'll see all of the meeting presentation handouts that we've ever had, including Janette's. Hers will be there as well. Um, After today's meeting, sometime probably in the middle of the week, Ava, who is in Paris, will send us the meeting summary. And of course, after Dr. Silverman is done with her talk, and maybe she has left the building like Elvis, you'll want to stick around and kibitz a little bit, whether you're in Chapel Hill or here on Zoom. Okay, before we get started, before I introduce the talk and our speaker, let me ask Michelle and those of you in Chapel Hill if you have something that you would like to add, um, anything that you would like to share with us, and those of you on Zoom, I ask you the same, give you the same opportunity, anything to share or anything to discuss, anything that should be on the agenda.
Excuse me, can I reach out to a friend who might be able to recruit people, not in person, but most likely Zoom. He knows a lot of people and can I do that? Or you
Ab-
don't want just anybody?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sure. Sure. Anybody you know who has an interest, tell them they can come in anytime next year. I don't want them to come in as a guest, though. I want them to come in as a member. It's free. They can certainly come in as a
Uh-huh.
guest with you.
Yeah.
And anybody can come in as a guest for the first time at no charge, but there's no charge for joining. And that way people will get Michigas, our little newsletter. They'll get access to the website. So please, yes, absolutely. Encourage your
Thank you.
friends.
Okay.
Okay. Well, our talk today is illegitimacy in the Jewish communities of Galicia. And our speaker is Dr. Janette Silverman. She's a professional genealogist. You might notice behind her is a logo for Ancestry.com. She heads a team of specialists in Eastern Europe, Eastern European Jewish genealogy at a division of Ancestry that does private client research. She doesn't look it, but she's been doing research for 40 years with her dad, and their casual hobby very quickly became an obsession. I think to call genealogy a hobby is wrong. Knitting is a hobby. Genealogy is an obsession, isn't it? And that later became the basis of her doctoral dissertation. I certainly want to hear more about that. Her research often involves in-person travel to archives in Europe and Israel, and she's looking forward to a research trip this summer to Poland and Lithuania. You may want to join us for our December
Well,
7th meeting and watch a film about
De- Debbie, let me just interrupt you for a minute. When I
it.
sent you that, that was an upcoming trip. I've just come back from that trip in Poland and Lithuania. Sorry.
That's okay, but it's still come back, still come and join us for December 7th and tell us how to do it right. She's calling us today from Phoenix. She's the former chair of the Phoenix JGS. She was co-lead at the 2016 IAJGS conference. And anybody who's been to one of those conferences knows how much work being the co-chair is. And she's a longtime Jewish Gen volunteer. She speaks at virtual and in-person conferences and at family reunions and gatherings. She's been published widely, blogs, journals, and has a most recent book called Stories They Never Told Us, published very recently, just August of this year.
And again, I apologize for that. That was August 2024 that it was published.
No problem. The fact that you're published is really what's important. All right. Her program today is certainly of interest to those of us who've been looking at birth, marriage, and death records. I personally have come across records that show a whole family, 7 kids, all of them illegitimate or missing a surname or having a hyphenated surname or not names that don't match the parents or the siblings or having married via a ritual marriage. Jeanette's going to explain how some of the very punitive family laws in the old Austrian Empire have led to these curiosities, how Jewish communities work to circumvent these laws, and how this is reflected in vital records and how we can gain more insight once we understand these things about our Galician ancestors. I'm going to ask that you put your questions for Janet in the in chat, and I will forward them to her, and we'll answer forward those questions so she can answer them after the presentation. I'm going to stop screen sharing, Janet, and turn
Yep.
it over to you.
And if you guys wouldn't mind, if you can mute yourselves, please, or if you're in the larger space, if you can mute that, because any conversation or sounds are going to be picked up by the mics. And although they may not distract you, it doesn't take much to distract me, and I'll start listening rather than following my own script. Let me just share my screen with you. I'm really delighted to be here today. I prefer to be there in person, but my travels lately have not taken me into North Carolina. I visit my sister and brother-in-law fairly often. They live in Chapel Hill, and but most recently I've been here, there, and everywhere except for North Carolina. The image that you see on the slide is one of a street in Galicia, and I took it in 2019 on another research trip, and it doesn't look that much different than the streets probably looked about 150 years ago. The lamps on the street are no longer gas or candles. But the street itself of cobblestones hasn't changed much. The people, of course, weren't wearing jeans and the women weren't wearing pants when they were walking down those streets in Galicia 150 years ago, as they are now. But with very little imagination, you can picture that street as it was when our ancestors walked on it. Today's talk's going to take us to the earliest part of the 20th century, and then we're going to go back in time as we explore some of the factors that affected the Jewish community in Galicia, part of the Austrian Empire, from the 1770s until the end of World War I in 1918. The title of this talk, Illegitimacy in the Jewish Communities of Galicia, is a really serious subject, especially when we're discussing a people who had few options when faced with repressive laws. Many of us, myself included, were shocked when records of our grandparents and great-grandparents from the Austrian Empire were finally fully translated. Terms like illegitimate and unmarried jumped off the page. How could our ancestors have cohabited and had illegitimate children? Another surprise is reading through indexes on JRI Poland and Gesher Galicia and seeing the many surnames used by our ancestors. What does all of this mean? Well, punitive and restrictive laws in the Austrian Empire resulted in choices made by the Jewish community to circumvent them. Although the Austrian Empire and later the Austro-Hungarian Empire, also known as Austria-Hungary, encompassed a lot of territory. With the exception of some historical comments, the focus of today's talk is going to be the part of the empire that was the province called Galicia. These laws were originally instituted to curtail the size of the Jewish community and to create boundaries, but the communities themselves found ways to work around the laws. Today, we're going to discuss these and the insights we can gain about the lives of our ancestors. I hope it'll help you understand the unexpected name variations and the many surnames used by our ancestors. I want to say a word first about the legal status and cultural clashes. In many places, illegitimacy is when a child is born to an unwed mother. In Judaism, although there's a status of illegitimacy, it's not defined by a child born to an unwed mother. In Jewish tradition, an illegitimate child called a mamzer is a child born of a forbidden sexual union, specifically incest or adultery. First, traditionally in Judaism, marriages are dictated by religious laws, not civil laws. In Israel, for example, there's no civil marriage. Marriage is all controlled by religious authorities. In Judaism, divorce has been permitted since antiquity. In modern times, where civil divorce is permitted in many places, it's important for a Jewish couple who are observant Jews to have a religious divorce as well. If a Jewish woman remarries after a get, the Jewish divorce, children born out of the subsequent marriage are mamzerim, the plural of mamzer. The repercussions are extreme for the child. The child's forbidden in traditional Judaism from marrying within the Jewish community. But the illegitimacy we're going to speak of today, that found in the Austrian Empire, is very different from that of traditional Judaism, and the repercussions are also different. Perhaps, though, by knowing what in traditional Judaism is illegitimate might help you understand why the community made the choices it did. Maybe illegitimacy mandated by law was only an inconvenience to many Jews, not anything with deeper consequences. We're going to begin today by providing context into what ultimately resulted. We're going to look at some of the laws enacted by the Austrian Empire even before Galicia was established during the course of the three partitions of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Due to time constraints, we're only going to be addressing the laws superficially to provide just a little bit of background. The partitions of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the laws established in its wake would require significant study, months or years probably, to understand them fully, if not to read them all. If you grew up in a Jewish home and went to religious school as I did, you might have heard about the partitions. I never understood what that meant or why it was important. And frankly, no one ever explained what the term meant. The time period and places involved were not anything covered in elementary school when I was learning about this in religious school. And it wasn't until I became serious about genealogical research and could put the places and time periods into context that I understood what this meant. So I'm going to give you a brief overview that really is an oversimplification, but may provide some context. The giant Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a confederation of the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, established in the 16th century, which formalized a union from the 14th century. Fast forward to the 1770s, and over about a 25-year period, from 1772 to 1795, it was destroyed in three partitions. Those are those famous partitions, with land ceded to the Kingdom of Prussia, the Austrian Empire ruled by the Habsburgs, and the Russian Empire, also called the Tsarist Empire. Today's talk is about Galicia, a province established by the Austrian Empire in part of the territory they took during those partitions. This map of early 19th century Europe is after the partitions and after Napoleon's 1815 fall. It dates from about 1815. And you'll note the large swath of land in the lower right quadrant of the map that belonged to the Ottoman Empire. Some of this, and I know that this is sort of stretched. I was trying to make it bigger so that you could see it on the screen. So it's a little, so the words look like really elongated in some places, but I wanted to make it so that you could see something of it. Some of this territory from the Ottoman Empire was ceded to the Austrian Empire and some to the Russian Empire before the end of the 19th century. And you'll notice some of those places, like Bucharest. During the first partition, the Austrian Empire established what became known as Galicia. And during the third partition, it became a kingdom under the Austrian Empire. And during our conversation before I started speaking, we were talking about some of the places that some of you had been from, your families had been from. My family was from Stanislavov, which is now known as Ivano-Frankivsk. Some of you mentioned Lviv or Kolomia or Zhezhov, and you'll see other places, probably not all the tiniest towns on this map, but certainly quite a number to find your towns on here. Some laws, like the ones we're going to speak about, were enacted for two reasons: to ensure that a group of people designated as the other had restrictions put on their movements, and to force the people to obey laws which were designed to force them to abandon their religion and culture and to conform to the norms and traditions of the larger Christian society. Might sound like some other laws that we know of, including laws in the US that dealt with removing Native American children and putting them into Indian schools to delete their culture and history. It's not too different from that. After the partitions, when the Austrian Empire found itself with much larger Jewish partitions than it had prior to the partitions, the laws were extended to the newly acquired population. Austrian Empire law insinuated a civil registration component on events that were otherwise under the jurisdiction of the Jewish community, like births, marriages, divorces, and deaths. The children of Jews who married only according to Jewish law without a civil license were considered illegal immigrants by the authorities, meaning they had no status in society, and these children were deemed illegitimate. One positive genealogical result of this discriminatory law, or these discriminatory laws, I should say, was that precise lists of Jewish families were kept, noting which families lived in which towns. Such lists started in 1799 and were updated until about 1830. Before the partitions, the Jewish population in Prussia and Austria was pretty low, and in Russia there was no Jewish presence. The Austrian Empire, which had a Jewish population prior to the partitions, had established laws directed at them. But after the partitions, existing laws were extended to include the newly acquired communities, and more laws over time were established. Some of these laws included restrictions on the number of families living in a town, of Jewish families living in a district. An example of a law would be that only one son of a Jewish family was permitted to marry. At the time of the marriage, the new household was required to register and pay a substantial tax. No other male in the family was eligible to marry unless the previous married man died. You could get around this, but you'd have to pay a significant fine or tax. This set the framework for what would become the norm later of not registering marriages with the civil authorities and thus not establishing a legitimate household. Children born to these illegal or unregistered unions had restrictions imposed on their private and professional lives, and also restrictions on the opportunities available to them. They weren't permitted to do official business with the government. They couldn't apply for business licenses. They were restricted in their choice of occupations, and they weren't given permission to move from one jurisdiction to another. Permission to relocate was only given to legitimate households. Another major repercussion, and one that affected probably almost all of the households, was that a child whose parents didn't register their marriage could not inherit from their father on his death. In 1734, also prior to the partitions, a law was passed that set the age of consent to marry. Jewish brides and grooms couldn't marry before they were 15 and 18. Brides and grooms had to provide documentation proving their ages. To do this, they had to have a birth record. Although 15 and 18 sounds really young to us today, Jewish children were often promised to each other at an early age, and then at puberty, the marriage might be permitted. Not all marriages were handled this way, but the government wanted to impose laws on the community to align it with what was permissible in the church. Births had to be registered with the church parish in a circumcision register or have a local nobleman attest to the birth in order to have proof of age for the marriage. Since births were not always registered, an official in the town needed to provide a statement attesting to the age of the bride and groom. You can only imagine how eager Jews might have been to ask an official to provide testimony for them. In 1868, what appeared to be relief from some of the punitive marriage laws came with the abolishment of these harsh laws. That relief was really short-lived. And because the region's Jewish population was traditionally very opposed to any government interference, many Jews continued with their longstanding practice of not registering their marriages with the civil authorities, which led to the next issue. In 1875, in the 1870s, laws were passed to ensure compliance with registration of civil marriages within the Jewish community. Registrars were appointed who were responsible for collecting and registering births, marriages, and deaths. In 1877, 2 years after the law was passed, they first established the qualifications of those registrars. So you can imagine the confusion and inconsistencies of the 2 years prior to the requirements being established. Forms and procedures were developed, and only the official rabbi of the community was permitted to perform marriages. Illegitimacy carried a stigma outside Galicia, and the illegitimate status of a person also carried travel restrictions. So the illegitimate civil status became something needing a workaround. The significance for Jews choosing not to register their marriage was minimal. The most important thing was to maintain legitimacy in all actions within Jewish law. The 1875 laws said that children born to couples who did not register their civil marriage were illegitimate, and legally they could only use their mother's birth surname. In some cases, the father wasn't mentioned at all on the birth record. The situation of not recording marriages began to change in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries when immigration to the US and other countries increased and travel documents became necessary. Suddenly, Jewish couples had to prove they were married and that their children were legitimate in order for them to travel. Many couples registered their marriages with the Austrian government years or even decades after their religious marriage. This mass marriage registration also resulted in surname changes for wives and children, which makes Jewish research in Galicia extremely challenging, especially if several name changes occurred in a family as parents and even grandparents registered their marriages. We're going to look at multiple surnames being added to an original birth name by the time we're done today. And we're going to first start by looking at some birth, marriage, and death records from several places in Galicia. But the first record I want to show you is not from Galicia. Okay, go figure. I'm getting off the track, but this is important, I think. This documents for the family of Moses and Pearl Silverman in Suceava, now Romania, previously in Bukovina province, Austrian Empire. Moses and Pearl are my great-grandparents, but that's not why I'm showing you this. I'd love to talk to you about my family from Galicia and elsewhere, but this record truly has some meaning here. It's really unlikely that they waited to marry until 1899 when their first child was born around 1880, even though this document says that their marriage occurred in 1899. This is called a family information sheet, and it's dated October 29th, 1913. Moses's birth date on this, and on the right side of the screen, you'll see it in a slightly enlarged format, what's on the left side of the screen. I wanted to show you the full document on the left side. Moses's birth date is according to information he told them, not from any documentation. And it says that on here. Their daughter Leah is listed as engaged to Abraham Hirsch-Barish, but Leah had already married him years earlier. Pearl and Moses' son Abraham Joseph left for America. All of this information is on this page. And he's a bookbinder. Udall is in the military. Another son, David, who left for the U.S. in 1905, isn't even on the page. And a son, Solomon Wolfe, who died in early childhood's on the list, and the information about his death, like Moses's birth year, was provided orally. As I said, the family was from Suceava, Romania, which, although was never in Galicia. But, and this is what's significant here and the reason that I'm showing you this, Moses and Pearl lived in Tarnopol, which was a province in Galicia before, or an area in Galicia, before relocating to Suceava between the births of their second and third children. The record gives us information about the possibility of something that happened before they came to Romania, and therefore alerts us to the possibility of needing to look under the mother's maiden name for the births of their children, not just the father's surname. Even if your ancestor's last known place of residence was in another part of the Austrian Empire, not in Galicia, it's important to make sure they didn't arrive in that place from Galicia. And I know from research that although family stories indicate that a family lived in a place from time immemorial, that was not always the case. Family stories really need to be taken with a large, not even a grain of salt. How about a handful of salt? Our ancestors moved around. I personally was shocked when I discovered that my Romanian family had originally come from Galicia, from an area um, to the north of where I tracked them, where my grandfather said the family was from, where my great grandmother Pearl, who moved to the US, said the family was from. Pearl would always tell my father they were from Romania. She wasn't born in Romania. She was born in Galicia. So be careful what you think is true. Pre-1877 Jewish records use the same forms as the Roman Catholic registers, and they were written in Latin and or German. Post-1877 records from the area provide more details and were written in German and Polish. Also, while pre-1877 Jewish birth records name the father of illegitimate children, later birth records do not include the father's name at all. In this record, which is from 1878, the word illegitimate was changed to legitimate when the father did something. And you can see that on the bottom of the record, it says, I acknowledge to be the father of this child. And it's signed by Beres Shalit, but the child is not called Shalit in this record. He's Stickler. This is the 1897 birth record for Chaya Stickler. And you can see how specific the wording is about her status and her parents' relationships. Chaya, illegitimate daughter. Father, allegedly Leib Czech, a furrier. Mother, Yuda Stickler, ritually married to Leib Czech, daughter of Isaac and Gitlis Stickler, peddlers. Gives us a lot of information here. That's one of the reasons why it's really important to get all of the words translated from your documents. Schendel and Zweifler and Shimon Chrysler married ritually, and sometime later, he admitted paternity. They had 10 children born between 1875 and 1894. That means she was pregnant for the better part of almost 20 years. The children were all registered as Zweifler, not Chrysler. There's no father on Samuel Zweifler's 1880 birth record. Only his mother is shown. In the notes on the bottom, it says that Shimon claimed paternity, and this is a record from Stanislavov, which is now Ivano-Frankivsk, about 70 miles or so east of Lviv. Schendel was called Sophie by her American relatives, although she never left Europe. So although records in the US often refer to her as Sophie, she never appears as Sophie in European records. And this is something, a disconnect between what a person was called in the US and what their name actually was in Europe. In 1909, Schendel and Shimon's daughter, Deborah Zweifler, aka Chrysler. Debbie, you were asking about that Vel. Here we see the Vel. Deborah Zweifler, Vel Chrysler. Vel means also known as, aka. There's three things that we need to look for in these records. R, which stands for recta, meaning rectified, F for false, and V for Vel. And in this case, the record says Deborah Zweifler's Vel Chrysler. Her parents were Schendel Zweifler and Shimon Chrysler. And I'm going to explain more a little later about those initials and what they actually mean when you see them in records. It's really confusing. And if I'm saying it's really confusing, you know it's really confusing. So Blima Rose, my grandmother, was born out of wedlock. Zelig Grass requests to enter his name as the father in the birth record. This is what it says in a note. Her mother is Ita Chrysler, daughter of Shimon Chrysler. The document itself looks sideways, but the headings, the column headings on the top are written horizontally, and the record is presented in the book with the headings on the top. So the area that is in red on the left side of the screen is the same as the area that's horizontally on the right side of the screen. The marriage of Zelig and Ita was registered in Stanislavov on March 21st, 1909. My grandmother was not born in 1909. She was born in 1898. So when she was born, she was registered as illegitimate, and then they married, and the marriage is then noted on the birth record. So what's the big deal? Can't you just look up the records? Illegitimacy is an interesting factoid, but research is still research, right? Well, not exactly. The importance of illegitimacy in Galicia records is not to be minimized. In fact, in my opinion, it may be the most important part of research in the area. And let's look at some other documents now and discuss what they tell us. Although this is very hard to read, I think you can all see the name on the left, Israel. That's the name of the child. This is an 1888 birth record from a town called Adamanca, which is in Galicia. Israel was the illegitimate son of Labish Roth, a merchant, and Rachel Morgan. Rachel's parents were Israel Morgan, so her son is named after her father, and Rachel's mother was Rivka Morgan. All of Labish and Rachel's children are indicated the same way on their birth records as illegitimate. It's important to note that the names of Rachel's parents are included in this, and this is typical on birth records for children whose parents were only married according to Jewish law. So you want to find out your great-great-grandparents' names? Hope that your grandparents are listed as illegitimate, in which case your maternal ancestor from 2 generations earlier is going to be on that record. One of Labish and Rachel's children, Henning, died shortly after birth. She was only 14 days old, and she died of convulsions. Although this too is difficult to read, you can see Henny's name 3 columns from the right. It's in the red, and it's Henny Morgan, not Roth, although her parents' names come right under there, Rachel Morgan and Labish Roth. The record reads, Henny Morgan, 14 days old, died of convulsions, illegitimate daughter of Rachel Morgan and the unmarried Labish Roth, merchant in Virginia, residing in Atamonka. And it has a house number. House number is 124. Now, although the house numbers have whatsoever to do with illegitimacy, I do want to comment on this. If you can find other records with house number 120, very possible that you can find earlier generations of the family that you're looking for. You might also find the maps on Gesher Galicia, that are the cadastral maps that are going to help you locate where the house was. And the houses were not in order. So 123 and 125 are not going to be on either side of 124. The house numbers in most of the towns are in towns that are too small to have street names, and the houses are going to be numbered in the order in which they were built. So the house numbers, if you're looking to find your family, are going to become important. Very frequently, I will be looking through volumes of books and reels of microfilm or lots of digital images, just looking for that house number. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you see it on here? Whoops, sorry. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns to the left of that red border, and it says 124 in there. That's what you're looking for. Now, so I can find them perhaps by looking for the house number. But if I was looking for the Roth name in indexes, and the Roth name is what the family uses today, I will not have found the record for the family. The indexes don't always pick up both names. So you want to make sure that when you're looking for records in Galicia, you're looking for both the mother's maiden name and the father's name. I don't quite mean that, because what if her parents weren't ritually married? We're only ritually married. You want to look for her birth name. In another instance, I was looking for records for a woman named Frieda Schwell. I knew her father was Aaron Schwell, and she married someone whose name was Schlinger. I'd found some records from Krakow where the family lived, dated 1941, and Frieda, but not her husband, was on a family list with her father. Great, I found the family. But then I found a record of a Frieda Schlinger née Schurz with the same address as the 1941 record. I searched for a marriage, not of Frieda Schwell, but of Frieda Schurz. Maybe her father wasn't really Aaron Schwell. Maybe her mother was married prior to marrying Aaron. lots of different scenarios. I can make up a ton of stories until, let's call them hypotheses, until I find the reality from the records. The marriage record gave me more information than I was expecting. It said that the groom was Saul Rafał Schlinger, a stallkeeper, so I have his occupation, born in Krakow, residing in Dębica, son of Leah Schlinger and the unwed father Kasil Malinger, a tailor in Krakow. Saul Rafał was 23 years old at 23 years and 2 months old. So a birth record if the birth record exists. But I'm not going to Malinger, his father's name, it's going to be under his mother's name, Schlinger. How they married. The bride was Frida Schurz, born in Vilopoli, residing in Dębica, daughter of Perla Schurz and the unwed father Aaron Schwell, a baker in Dębica. And she was a maiden who was 23 years and 3 months old. So I know what Frida's mother's name was, but that wasn't the issue. I know that Frida's parents and Saul Rafał's to the laws of the Jewish community. If I want information about either of them, I need to use the mother's names. And if I want information about the fathers, it's not going to be the names by which Frida and Saul Rafał are known by. Saul Rafał wasn't known at all by his father's surname Malinger, and Frida's collateral relatives became known by the surname of Schwell, not Schurz. Frida's mother's death record tied Frida's parents together and confirmed that they didn't have their marriage registered with the civil authorities. Her death was confirmed on April 30th. She died on April 29th, and she was buried on May 1st. This is all in 1918 in Krakow. The deceased was Perla Schurz, a 60-year-old female, the ritually married wife of Aaron Schwell, a Talmud scholar born in Sanok. It even gives me the cause of death. She died of tuberculosis of the lungs. Not a lot of words on this page, but an awful lot. And thankfully, it's written clearly enough for me to read this, and I don't read Polish. Polish is, of course, written using a Latin alphabet, not the same alphabet we use. There's additional diacritical marks and letters that we don't have. But you can see easily Krakow, Perla Schurz, Aaron Schwell, Sanok, all kinds of things that you can pick out without reading the record. I usually Google Polish months and keep a list of the Polish months on my screen when I'm doing this so I can figure out a lot of the months are not going to be they'll be written using the Roman numerals. So April, the 4th month, might appear as IV, the Roman numeral for 4, rather than the word for the month of April. Does it affect your research, or does it? A search of JRI Poland's record found the following couple getting married, Charnatoba and Simon. But look at all the surnames they're using. The father's surnames were both Chrysler, but the bride and groom as well. So what does it tell us about their families? Well, to briefly recap, in Galicia, Austria, most Jews did not register their marriages with the civil authorities. Austrian taxes on marriage and the limitations of who was permitted to marry in a family set the stage for what became widespread throughout Galicia. That's not to say that Jews disregarded a formal marriage. Jewish law was upheld and marriages remained within the Jewish community according to Jewish law under a chuppah with a ketubah. The government did not recognize those religious marriages. Births of children of these marriages were recorded as illegitimate, and records often only contained the mother's information, or depending on the town and the year, if the father appeared, both parents were noted, but the birth record still recorded the child with the mother's surname. What does this mean for how you're reading the records? So, recta, often recorded or abbreviated as R, means legally or correctly or corrected, and was used to correct the surname of an individual, sometimes following a civil marriage between the parents. An example, Brown recta Cohn means the person used Brown, but Cohn's the legal name. False, often abbreviated, implies usage and means an individual might use the father's surname, but officially should be using the mother's surname due to lack of a civil marriage registration. Don't panic. All of this is on the handout that you can get once you register once you sign into their website and download the handout. So, an example, Brown F. Cohn, means the person used Cohn, the father's surname, but Brown is the legal name, the mother's surname. Vel translates to also known as, and we saw that a little earlier, the residents known by both surnames, maternal and paternal. If vel appears between two given names, this might signify the Jewish versus secular name or nickname versus the legal given name. Blima Vel Rosa Chrysler. Blima is also. And by the way, when my grandmother, Blima Rosa, came to the US, that was pretty much how you'd find her, sometimes as Blima and sometimes as Rosa in all the US documents. Vel's mostly used with given names and false or recta with surnames, but vel can also be found with surnames. Now, the use of alternative names appears in many places throughout Europe and elsewhere. This is not unique to the Jewish community. For example, you might be familiar with DIT names in the French communities in France and French-speaking countries, and also in French Canada. Alias names were common elsewhere, like in the Czech Republic, and they're used to distinguish one person by another with the same name. But this is different from the widespread use of false recta and vel in the Jewish communities of Galicia, where legal issues caused the use of multiple surnames. Got another puzzling addition to a name that you might find is prima voto, meaning first marriage, or secundo voto, meaning second marriage. And you can see that in the last example on the screen. So although Jenny Brown married, her birth last name wasn't Brown. Brown was her current married name. Her first married name was Chrysler, and the record doesn't tell us if she's a widow or a divorcee. And we're going to wind up with lots of other permutations like this all over the place in Galicia. Keep the page out that's in the handout that gives you the key for this. False means false, also abbreviated as F. Recta, abbreviated as R, means right or corrected or rectified. Vel, abbreviated with a V, means or AKA. Prima voto could be 1A vote, first marriage. Secundo voto could be 2A vote, second marriage. And we don't know if the bride in those cases is widowed or divorced. If divorced, there might be a divorce record. Remember, divorce is legal in the Jewish community. If she's a widow, there might be a death record of a first husband. Let's take a look at another example. Chrysler, false Reuben. Chrysler's this person's legal surname, not Reuben. Axelrod, recta carpal. Axelrod is not the legal name. This person should be using the legal name of Carpal. Giddel, Vel Gussie. She's known by both Giddel and Gussie. The last one's the clearest one, right? Everything else is, oh my, how do I work my way through this? I need a map. A last bit of confusion might be found in this 1906 birth record, amended in 1915 and then again in 1924. In 1906, a child was born on April 29th and was circumcised on May 6th. So we know it's a boy, right? Jacob, the illegitimate son of Samuel Krantz, aka Lieber, residing in Jeshiv, and Sheva Zissel, single, residing in Jeshiv. Sheva, the mother of Jacob, is the daughter of Itzik and Chandel Rivka, whose surname is Zissel. Okay, so Sheva Zissel is the daughter of a married couple. The remark says, I'm admitting to be the father of this child and demanding to add my name as his father. That's in 1912. Okay, it took the guy 6 years. Samuel Kranz, aka Lieber, agreed with this demand. It's the so the father is then certifying by signing that he said this. Jacob Zissel became Jacob Kranz after his parents' civil marriage in 1915. Okay. So Jacob's parents, Samuel and Sheva, married registered their marriage 9 years after he was born. And then his grandparents registered their marriage in 1924, and he became Jacob Lieber. You can't get a whole lot more confusing than this, right? So on the screen, and again, this is in the handout, these are of the places where you can look to find records. This is not the sum total of all of the records. Some of the archives in Europe, some of the other archives in Europe might have more material on site. And these are just some of the digital online of the material. And again, this is in your handout. Today, we've taken a brief look at some of the interesting, confusing, and challenging issues that we encounter in researching Eastern European Jewish families who lived in Galicia, Austrian Empire. The issues didn't just end with the dissolution of the empire after World War II. In fact, descendants of some of the Jewish families from this region still carry multiple names and often wonder why some records for their grandparents have one surname and other records have a different name. Some people came from Europe with hyphenated last names, where the names of both their father and their mother were incorporated instead of the word vel, recta, or false between the names as a hyphenated name. I hope that today's presentation gave you some insight into the issues and will strengthen your own research skills and knowledge, and also strengthen your assistant and find the records. The Genealogy at a Glance series has for many years been published by genealogical.com, and I wrote one about Eastern European Jewish research. You might consider ordering one for yourself if you're interested in understanding some of the other permutations of Eastern European Jewish research. My book, Stories They Never Told Us, was published in August 2024. Please look for it through the many distributors carrying it. QR codes from Family Treemaker and Amazon are on the screen if you wish to order it through either of those distributors. And last but not least, I'm really thrilled to be one of the Jewish Book Council's 2025-2026 authors. And that and the reception that I've gotten from Family Treemaker has been so heartwarming for me. I'm so pleased with that. And I'm thrilled to be able to be here today and that so many of you have joined me. Um, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that I can see you in a larger format and so that you can see each other also. And I see there's two things in the chat. Oh, those are both
Yes, I think, Janet, the first question is from our president, from Barbara
from Barbara.
Friedman. And why don't we alternate between our Zoom callers and our in-person callers?
Sure.
Barbara, if you don't mind, Barbara Friedman, if you don't mind unmuting, why don't you just go ahead and verbalize your question for Janet? And Janet, thank you. You answered a couple of questions of mine. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Barbara.
Sadly, the families that I'm researching are mostly in Belarus, and the documents are
Oh,
scarce.
oh,
But the amount of detail in these records is incredible.
mhm,
And I wondered what was the underlying reason for the government to want to have so much information? Was
mhm.
it taxes? Was it
Partly,
restrictions? Was it
partly
in?
taxes, partly conscription. Um, so the rules about what was going to be on the records were set earlier, and if you go back far enough into where the records are kept by the churches, you're going to find minimal records in there. A lot of the records and the details in them wind up being set by Napoleonic standards, even though it didn't directly affect most of the places in this region. A lot of the countries and the provinces felt the impact of the Napoleonic metrical laws, the laws about what was going to be included in the records. Belarus, I can only feel for you. Not only are the normal restrictions about getting into the archives still present after the, I want to say, advent of COVID. Um, the lasting impact of COVID was that not only were significant deaths all over the world felt, but the archives never opened as fully as they had been pre-COVID. So there's much fewer employees in the archives, especially in Belarus, and restrictions about the number of researchers permitted in the archives, plus the amount of material they can look at, is enormous. The Minsk archives are shut down because of renovations, and um, there's no word about when they're going to be reopened. Uh, the archives do not permit researchers to take photographs in the archives, nor do they permit their staff to make a copy on the spot. You have to apply for that. It used to be 60 to 90 days to get an actual copy of the record. I'm waiting for some records for well over a year. My researcher in the archives, who used to be employed by the archives, goes in there and she looks through all the records because most of them are not digitized, and she just types out Cyrillic transcriptions of every detail from the record and then sends them to us, and then we translate them.
Hmm.
Yep.
Not
Yeah.
good.
Nope. It's horrendous.
Hmm. Well, let me ask Michelle in Chapel Hill, who has a question.
Look, there it goes. Okay, so I've been having a hard time tracking all the different combinations of names at every source. Um, what I've also found is the first names change, not just stuff like the example you gave of Gussie and Gittle, but also the different variations of the names within it. So you'll have Labe, who's also Arya, who's also Labish, who's also, if they're rabbis, they often have like a third honorary title. So it's different than what's on there. And I am not sure how to figure out a name at every resource. And it feels exponential.
It, it it's very confusing. So one of my favorite resources is this. It's an old book. It's by a guy named Alfred Kolach, and through spellings, there's some Yiddish variations, there's meanings of names. It's divided by male and female names. My second favorite source, and they're on the same level, is on Jewish Gen, going to the Jewish Gen Given Names database, which I believe is under the Eastern European Division. Um, if you go to countries and if you go into Jewish Gen and you click on countries in Eastern Europe, it's one of the items that Gen Given Names database, and it's a little difficult to maneuver. It's an old database. The founders of it, the developers of it, are long gone. That is deceased, not and a brilliant team. And it's not comprehensive, but it should give you quite a bit of information about the equivalency of names. Also, Warren Blatt's presentations in the FAQs or the info files on Jewish Gen discusses names. You need to know quite a bit about biblical traditions and naming conventions. So for a name like Labe, which would be Yiddish for lion, the Hebrew equivalent is Arya, and you very frequently find the names Arya or Ari and Labe combined, or even Labe and Gur. Gur is a lion cub, and those will be combined with Judah, Yehuda. Why? Because in the biblical text, when when Jacob was giving his blessings to his children, he compared them to various animals or strengths or traits, and he said that his son Judah was like a lion cub. So very frequently the name Judah is combined with Labe or Arya or Gur. Labe, Arya, and Gur all mean the same thing. So sometimes it is Labe, sometimes Gur, and sometimes Arya, or a combination of many of those.
that with Dove Bear, those are the equivalents, and then it's Bearish, Berko, Burka. So
Yeah,
there's lots.
and so and yeah, so Dove Bear, yep. But you got to be careful with that because some of those bears were really Baruch, and somebody was just calling him Beryl. And you'll very frequently find those with Benjamin.
Oh, wasn't there?
You need to be really careful. I'm working on somebody's Polish uh, citizenship papers, and this guy's grandfather's listed as Moses, Moshe, and Mojek. And we have to be able to prove through documentation to the Polish government that this was the same person, not three different people.
Janet, can I ask? I'm going to go ahead and screen share. I'd like you to walk us through the steps if you don't mind. of where that resource is?
Ah, okay, go down. It's right under Eastern Europe, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the first one, Jewish given names database. First one, second column, under Eastern Europe.
Under
Go
Eastern
down
Europe.
under Eastern Europe.
Here it is.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Click on that.
Yeah.
And then you're going to go on the left side, stop scrolling. On the left side, search the GNDBs. Next one down. Yep. Nope. Right there. And then go down. Now, so I usually start with European country. I usually start with Poland or Lithuania. So start with Poland and put Leib, Leib, or Lejb, either one, or Lieb, either way. Anyway, hit search. So this is coming up with a female name, Liba. And if you go back and it's all the equivalents, if you go back and spell it Leib, and you're going to find Arya Leib, you're going to find Leo or Lion or Leon, which are forms of lion, and it's going to give you some other choices here, and it tells you that it's Yiddish or German. And it gives you even some more names here where you're going to find other variations. If you go back to that top, back to the search, and put in Lithuania instead of Poland. And sometimes you need to look at many different of these options before you're going to come up with something to give you a full spectrum. And this is also, you'll see here in this third one, you're going to see it's Leonis, which that AS ending are Lithuanian name endings. But you're going to see different types of forms in the Yiddish too. Aren't you glad you asked that question?
Janet, all the years I've been on Jewish Gen, I wasn't aware of this spot, this page. So let's go back again. We started Jewish Gen and we went to,
Country and topical databases
and then we scrolled down and went
to
over
Eastern
here.
Europe.
Okay. Wow. That very helpful. Very helpful. And could you also give us the name of that book? I think you said the author
Yep.
was Kolach. Would you
Yep.
hold that up again?
Oh, I'm not screen sharing. So,
That's what,
okay, here. Yeah.
you can no, hold it up or just and recite it to me.
Yep. It's the complete dictionary of English and Hebrew first names.
English and Hebrew first names.
Yep.
Let's see if there is a copy we can get somewhere.
Yep.
And there
Mhm.
you can see.
And that white a different version of it. It may be a newer version of it. I
Okay.
have a copy of the white one too, and I've got these books laying all over the place.
Another website called bloodandfrogs.com that has
Mhm.
a helpful link about animal parents.
Yep.
I have people mark.
And there's a lot of things. There was, I can't remember the exact names, but I had two people who looked like they were brothers. Their marriage record said that their parents were the same people. The father's names on the gravestone were completely different. There were two Yiddish names and they didn't bear any resemblance. I found the father's gravestone in Europe, and it had both of the names that were on each of the children's gravestones, which made me know that yes, this really is the right person. but you need to really, really dig deeply sometimes in order to figure this stuff out.
We have 8 people on Zoom with us, so let me ask if any of our Zoomers have a question. Jane, you'll have to unmute first. Jane, I think you joined us about mid-session, so go right ahead.
No, this is all very interesting, but I just got back from Moldova, where I went to the archives and they took a history from me because this archive will not deal with anybody who shows up, who writes only in person.
Right.
Hmm.
I've been there. It's an interesting experience. The best thing I found in Moldova, I have to tell you, was my mother's maiden name is Moldavsky. The
Uh-huh.
family was not from Moldova. The family was from around Kiev, believe it or not. And I've got records going back to 1795 that intimate that the family was in that area from a much earlier time. Never in Moldova. Nobody knows where the Moldavsky name came from. But on wine, it says Moldavsky. So I brought back several bottles of Moldavsky wine.
Oh.
Okay. Let me turn the mic back over to Chapel Hill. Michelle, who's there who has a question?
Well, I was just gonna say that my husband's name is Moldov, and they were Moldovskis, and I have a little bit of information about that. They're from outside Kiev, and they're from Stavis.
Interesting. So my Moldavsky family is from Radomysl and Zhytomyr.
Okay. Yeah, they're Moldovskis.
Okay.
Wow.
I have a question for you, Janet. I would love to know how your research with your dad led to your dissertation and what your dissertation was about. Because back when I was a young person and was going to grad school, there were no courses. There was no way to write a dissertation
Yeah. So the
about.
dissertation came about because I had um, the most amazing advisor and advising committee. My advisor was Byron Sherwin of blessed memory, and I kept giving him topics and proposals, and each time he said, "Sounds great, go for it." And then he'd look at me and he goes, "Are you really going to do this? Are you really interested in this?" And in 2009, I was about to take a trip to Ukraine for the first time. And I had been writing Holocaust material for use in Hebrew school classrooms for a number of years. And so I was doing a lot of Shoah research, and I was doing a lot of family research by that time. I had been for a long time. And Byron said to me, you know, while you're there, go into the archives, look at this stuff, and why don't you think about writing your dissertation about this? He says, I'm tired of dissertations that just sit on a shelf getting dusty that nobody uses. Do something practical. So my dissertation, and I've been told by the librarians at Spertus that it's had more requests for borrowing that than anything else. You can find a shorter version of it in my book, Stories They Never Told Us. That was adapted from that and updated with the research that I was doing. It's stories about my family, but it's how I found them. It's relating them and putting them in the picture of a broader historical and social context, and talking about the resources, the repositories, um, and the types of documents and what's in those documents. It also talks about where I screwed up, where I went down a rabbit hole that I shouldn't have gone down, um, and how I corrected that.
When you were doing this research, were you going with a guide? Did you speak the languages? Who helped you navigate?
So when I went to Ukraine in 2009, I had found 20 years earlier, I'd found my grandmother's brother, his wife, his son, and his daughter, his granddaughter, still living in Ukraine. They had survived the Holocaust. My grandmother's brother Samuel and his wife Diana and their son Eugene had all survived the Shoah and moved back to Stanislav. And I found them in maybe 1986, I guess, and started writing to them, corresponding with them. And Ella, Samuel's granddaughter, was an English teacher.
Mm.
She'd gone to a specialized elementary school that taught English, and she and I were corresponding. She made some inquiries from some archives, and I did something that's pretty stupid, talking about everything's illuminated. I decided I was not going to hire a guide. Ella had a former student who lived in Kiev and who was willing to drive me around and explore with me. He was willing to translate. He didn't know anything about Judaism, didn't know anything about research. Um, I poked around. I found a place to stay in Kiev. Miroslav met me at the hotel. The hotel had sent a car to the airport. Miroslav met me. Ella had given him the names and contact information in archives. Miroslav did not make reservations at some of the archives. So we showed up in Zhytomyr, and I describe it all in my book. We show up, we walk in. Nobody can help us. People are giving us a hard time. Sooner or later, we work our way through all of the red tape and get to the records. In Ternopil, we had an appointment at the archive. We get into the archives and we found absolutely nothing there. Miroslav's there. He's looking at material. He's translating from the Ukrainian, especially, and the Russian, especially in Zhytomyr, where on the right side of the page, it's Hebrew or Yiddish. Yiddish uses the Hebrew alphabet. On the left side of the page, it's in Russian, and Miroslav is translating the Russian, and he's trying to make the Yiddish names into regulation Russian names, which of course they're not. I can't read the Yiddish really well, but once he says what he thinks the Russian says, I can figure out the Yiddish names. And doing that, we get through those records. Found my grandfather's 1906 birth record and all the records of all of his siblings. Ultimately, have records from the Zhytomyr archives that go back into the early 1800s. And ultimately include the 1795 first Russian census. We got to Stanislav, Ivano-Frankivsk, and we had an appointment to go into the archive. The archivist there was hired originally to research what happened during the Holocaust to the Jews in Stanislav. She didn't know anything about Jews. She didn't know anything about the Holocaust. She was getting a lot of pushback from her colleagues there because anti-Semitism reigns well. So she was eager to meet me. And so, but the archives were closed during the summer. Most of the archives, or many of the archives, are closed in July and August. So she let us in through a back door. I had a tiny little computer with me. This is in 2009. And she made me put the computer away as soon as I heard the door being opened from anybody else. I was not permitted to speak if anybody else was in the room because they couldn't hear that somebody who spoke English was in there. And she had gone through all the records. She compiled, I don't know, 50 or 100 cards for me that were from their catalog that had the names I was researching and brought them over to me. We sorted through them. We figured out who we were interested in, and she brought the records out for me. And Ella was with me, my cousin, and she had never been in an archive before. She had never done anything like this. She didn't know anything about the Shoah in their town. She lives in a building that was built on the outskirts of the ghetto, and she was reading out loud some of the first person testimonies that were included in the archive, including an account of a man who saw some horrendous things happening. And happening in a river that was nearby. And she said, do you think this is the river that we've been going down to, that we're walking on the promenade? And I said, if that's the only river by that name here, then chances are that's the river. And she was just devastated. Later on that week, we met a non-Jew in town who started crying when he was telling me about the story of his aunt and uncle who had hidden Jews during the war. And then the next day, he brought me a copy of their book in a Russian and a copy of it in Polish, that had photographs of them with this guy that they had hidden, or with one of the people that they had hidden. So, a lot of stuff, a lot of emotional things. Um, and it's it's really hard to do. My grandmother's, all of her siblings, except for Samuel, who survived um, in Europe, and her sister Fanny, who came over with her in 1920, all of her siblings and her mother and her siblings' spouses and all of their children were all murdered during the Shoah on the streets by the Einsatzgruppen. Something like 42 people in my family on Hoshana Rabbah in 1941. And Hoshana Rabbah, of course, just passed.
There, sometimes, you can get a lot done on the internet, but there's nothing like getting your feet on the ground. Nothing
No,
like it. I see that Jane has a question, but Jane, I did promise a rotation here, so let's go back to Chapel Hill first. It looks like Liz, I think you have your hand up. Yes?
Yeah. Um, uh, I was wondering, outside of Galicia, were there other regions that had these restrictive marriage laws and naming conventions, that will, mess up our research?
you might find them elsewhere in the Austrian Empire, but I don't think any place else.
Just within the Austrian Empire. Okay.
And most specifically in Galicia. I don't think that the issue of um, working it as illegitimate on the birth records happened anyplace else. You're going to find some weird quirks in the Russian Empire records sometimes, where you only find a mother listed on a birth record. Child is not listed as illegitimate, but there might not be a father there. The child might have the mother's name, but there's no illegitimacy that's listed on those records. There were other quirks in the Russian Empire, but that's a subject for another talk.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jane on Zoom.
And this will be the last one.
Okay.
Thank
Jane,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Among the hints that I had was that my
Hints on ancestry? Or what hints?
hints that I had with me.
Oh, okay.
By the way, if you go to Ancestry and you look up my grandmother's last name and my grandfather's last name under Moldova or Kishinev, you find references to me. His name, my grandfather's, was Lemberg or Lemberger.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean they originally came from Poland?
It might mean that they were from Lviv, Lemberg was the German name for Lvov, which was the Polish name for Lviv, which is the Ukrainian version of it, but it might not. My Moldavskis did not come from Moldova.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a crapshoot. I look at Bader's work. I see where he's got the names listed from, and frankly, doesn't work for me. He's done brilliant, brilliant work, but it doesn't work for my family's names.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
Dr. Silverman, thank you so much for your valuable time. You'll be hearing from me a little bit later today or sometime tomorrow. Yeah, you're seeing, I don't know if you can see all the people on, especially on the Zoom side, who are giving you applause. This is the second time that you have spoken to our group. I'm sure there's going to be a third time. It was a very helpful presentation.
Thank you.
And we hope the next time you're in Chapel Hill, you'll give us a heads up.
I will.
because, like you said, it's always better to be in person if you
Yep.
can be. We're going to stick around and talk about you and other things. I'm just teasing, just a
No,
little
that's
bit.
okay. That's okay.
All right.
Anything
Well,
that you say about me behind my back, I won't hear. So
that's right. Well, enjoy the rest of the day.
okay,
You have a little bit
thanks.
more of your day left in Phoenix.
Yep,
And thank
it's only 11:30 here.
yeah, thank you so much again.
Thanks.
And I'll
Bye.
ask my that the our other members stay online for a little bit. Thank you, Janet. Okay. All right. So I know
Well,
some of
you're
you
not showing up.
you might not have been able to ask all of your questions, but you can certainly share them now. We've got a couple of people who've done heritage travel, some people who've done extensive research on their family names, and we can help each other. Michelle, let me bring it back over to Chapel Hill. What's going on over there? What questions or thoughts do you have about the presentation or other work that you're doing?
Presentation was great. I have a question. Maybe someone else knows this. It's kind of tangentially related, I guess, just to Galicia. I understand that people from Galicia tended to come to the US earlier than those from the Russian Empire. And at least I know it's true in my family, but I had heard that in general was true. Does anyone know why that's true?
Is Mike still there? Because his family is from Galicia, and he's also done a wonderful program for us on migration.
Uh, I hadn't heard that. I can say that all of my family that came over came between about 1895 and 1905. Um, the one small portion that came from Russia, which is actually not really my family, they came in about 1906. I know that there was, I did a presentation on people coming through Galveston, which a lot of Russian people came through there. I forget, there was some philanthropist who kind of organized that and set up an organization to help people come over from Russia and in through Galveston. But most of that was in the very early 1900s.
So my earliest relative came over in
They're gonna love my
Galicia.
resume. But
Huh?
Sorry about that. That was I was looking for something, a resource for you. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my relatives, like I said, in my case, it is true that both my grandmother, my dad's side is from Galicia, both his first one coming over in 1886, but they all came over by 1900, between 1886 and 1900, where my mother's side, who was all Russian Empire, 1898 through 1921, they came much later in general. Curious, I guess I can look into it and see. But 1886 I thought was fairly early.
I would assume it means either they had more means, and things weren't as big.
You're muted.
Things were
You're
Yeah,
muted.
you're right. And like they could have stayed longer in other places because it was more tolerable,
Right.
or they lacked means. Otherwise, those are really, I think, what the details are within that. There may not have been the same kind of transportation routes available deeper in.
True.
Barbara, you wanted to add something to
Well,
the discussion?
my Romanian grandmother came in 1903, which for my family, that was early. Most of them came more in the 1910 to 15 period. But 1903 was the infamous Kishinev pogrom that caused a lot of people, especially in Romania, to leave. And they were from Bucharest. They were not Moldovan, but that Kishinev pogrom must have been awful.
I think also you might remember that we had a speaker, can't remember her name right now, about the challenges of getting out of Europe. The fact that it geographically was difficult and that trains were difficult and it was hard to get the passes and the passports that you need. And the farther away you were, I imagine the more challenging it was to go anywhere to get out of any part of Europe. Um, and just speaking of videos, I want to remind all of you that if you didn't see those programs, we have a YouTube channel that you can go to direct. You don't have to go through our website. Just go to YouTube and type in Triangle Jewish Genealogical Society. And also let me share with you another JGS that has an excellent collection of videos on a variety of subjects. It is the Jewish Genealogical Society of Long Island. They have more than 45 videos that are really great for beginners. You can see right here a reference to the YouTube videos that they have. So those might be the kinds of places, Michelle, that you and others might be able to get the answers to your questions. And if you haven't seen Mike's presentation on migration from the old country to the United States and how did your relatives wind up in Detroit or Chicago or Milwaukee or wherever they wound up? Again, I would encourage you to go to our YouTube channel as well. Just a comment also about working with the archives. You heard Jane say that you have to go to the archives. They won't deal with you otherwise. And in my experience, you have to make an appointment. And if you don't have somebody there who can help you with the language, some people they just go and they just kind of hope for the best and they're trying to save money. You won't save money. You're going to waste time because you're not giving direction to your guides. Your guides might even be skilled, but they still need some guidance in terms of the information in order to help you. I remember going to, it was Krakow, about 12 years ago, and I had a great guide. He gave me his business card. He was a farm equipment salesperson, cultural interpreter, cemetery finder. You know, he had all of these things. And I didn't see what the farm equipment had to do with anything until a little bit later when we started to get out in the countryside. And he knew all of the farmers and he was able to ask them, well, where would we find information? And does your town have a library? So many of the guys are very well versed in a lot of aspects outside of Jewish genealogy. But when we got to the Krakow archives, the city archives, the lady there, I am sure, I mean, she knew I was American, she knew I was Jewish, and she refused to show me a record that she had in her hand. She wouldn't even turn it around just to show it to me. She definitely wouldn't let me take any pictures of it. So sometimes, and she did ask me for proof that I was related to my little cousin who had been murdered in the Holocaust. I had all the documents, and even so, she was just being extremely difficult. That was my first introduction to dealing with an archivist, and it was a terrible one. From that point on, things got a lot easier. But at some points, my guide said, Debia, he called me, Debia, don't say anything, let me speak. Because it was just better if the requests were coming from a Pole rather than from an American Jewess. So, you know, you can have all different kinds of experiences. There's also some fear by the archivist that you're there to make a grab or a claim on Polish property. So they may be reluctant for that reason. You just never know what's going on in their heads. My experience in Lodge, was went to the city archives and met a very nice young woman. I told her my family story. She was quite, I think, empathetic. She told me to come back the next day and she would have all of my mother's records that they had. And so we did. We came back the next day. She ushered me into a private conference room that had a big conference table in it. And she had my mother's, father's, and mother's records. She put one at one seat, one at the other, and then the 7 children, including my mother, all their birth records at different seats around the table. It was like they were there with me. It was an incredible moment. So again, you can sometimes find archivists who understand the importance of what you're looking for. And it's important for them too, because otherwise they're just dealing with paper. They begin to realize that there are people behind these documents that had lives, and that it's not only creating validity for you and the stories that you bring with you, but validity for them too and the work, the life's work that they've chosen. Nothing like getting your feet on the ground, folks.
Hmm.
Okay, back to Chapel Hill. What's going on back there?
Can I have a question and I don't know how to, you get me.
I found you.
Oh, I have a question. I'm a little confused. When you're talking about Galicia, I know that at the end of about what it was, 1790 something, Poland was partitioned into the three areas. One was Galicia, but that became part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And we always talking about the Pale, but that was controlled then by Russia, which was part of the Polish, what had been the Polish Empire.
The part that was partitioned off and added to Russia, that's what's called pale.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because
And
we're
by
talking, I'm taking an adult ed course about Israel and Palestine, and this teacher has really gone back to the history and talking about that. And when somebody mentioned about the 1903 pogrom in Kishinev, I think it was in Russia, about, the Russians tried to move all the Jews that they got into this area called the Pale, and you weren't allowed to leave unless you had special permission. I'm just a little confused in terms of, I know that so many of our ancestors, and I know my ancestors came from, we think was the Pale, that was Russia versus the is what now, part of Poland? Or
most of it is Ukraine, some of it's in Poland. And
But especially the places on the border, they swapped back and forth lots of times.
Yeah, most purple. Yeah.
You might want to take a look at how bookbinders talk. He starts out by saying, my grandmother lived in 3 countries during her lifetime and she never moved. And he's got a great YouTube video with maps that show how the borders, I think that was the name of his talk, the changing borders of Jewish Europe. And I think that might help. I think it was Margaret, were you the one asking the question?
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And what, this is a book, or you're saying that
It's a talk. Let me see if I can find a reference to it for you.
Oh, that would be great.
Okay. Let me screen share with you.
Yeah.
What I typed into Google is up here, how bookbinder changing borders. And it looks like he's got a handout maybe on the topic here. And I bet we can also find the video. I'm just going to go ahead and click on this first link. Looks like it's an old link. All right, so I'm going to check up here under videos, which is giving us talks about bookbinding. Yeah, let me make this a little bit more elaborate. Well, that's not working either. Let me try some of these others. Here we go. Looks like
Oh, okay.
it looks like he's got This was a program that already happened. I'm going to scroll through here and I will go ahead and ask Ava to put that link in there. But I am sure if I scroll a little bit more and do a little bit more research, I'll be able to find that topic. It might even be on, I might even have it on our YouTube channel. But he's a great resource for that. Let's see if it's here. No, not here. All right. Don't want to take up too much time looking for it, but I'm sure I can find it.
Thank you.
I agree. It's a very confusing topic. The history is confusing.
Yeah.
Have you used the town finder or the community finder on Jewish Gen?
No.
If you plug in, if you know what specific town name, they'll tell you before and after certain time periods. And sometimes you'll get 4 different areas of what it's been. Yeah, the name changed and who was in control. So it'll give you it'll say, oh, it was Austria here, then it became Lithuania, now it's Poland.
That website I can certainly share. Let's go to Jewish Gen, and it is under Town Finder, right?
Mhm. I use that a lot.
Oh, let's see. Yeah, here it is. It's under Discover. So go to Town Finder and then put in the name of your town. I'll just go ahead and put in a name. And if you can narrow down the country, that's helpful. But if not, just hit start the search. And there are 2 towns that sound like the town Yezhov. And as Talia said,
Huh.
it can tell
Now
you,
we
it
were
can,
all on the same time. Now we're not synchronized.
let me go ahead and mute someone was, let me make sure we've got this. I'm sharing this.
Okay.
Okay. So as Talia said, you can see where the town was after 1950, between the wars, and before World War One.
There should be a schedule link for,
If you click one of them, it'll give you more information because it'll tell you like how far it was from some of the other major towns.
Right.
So
So if
can you click one of the towns?
Yeah.
East, north, east of Lodge.
it's asking me to log in.
Always. Every 2 seconds, right?
There you go. So I clicked on that little icon and here's more information. And as I think Mike was saying, it can tell you if there's a Kahila page.
there it is.
Yes.
And if you go down, also these resource links at the bottom of the page.
Yeah. Wow.
So it'll tell you if there's any
Fascinating.
like so there'll give you some more encyclopedia links to it or
Mhm.
I have a question about back to the naming business.
Mhm.
Okay, okay, I have a lot of birth records that give the father's first and last name and only the mother's first name. So does that mean that if the father is actually named by his last name and the child is not, given the mother's last name, like she's saying? I have a lot of records like that.
in Galicia?
In Galicia, yeah. So I should have asked for that.
Well, you can contact Janet and ask her that question. I mean, if that's a relatively short question,
Yeah.
to ask her, she does have a private client business also. So if you need more help, you could
Yeah.
certainly ask her. But does anyone know the answer to that question? It sounds like that was what she was addressing in her talk, that it might mean that if there's no last name, that you would look at the father's name or the mother's name, possibly.
Yeah, I've always seen both names and actually kind of liked it because I feel like on the Russian side, you can never figure out the mother's name, right? Like, oh, sure, I can find it. I've never come across that.
I think Jane also asked a question about Lemberger. Does it mean that they were from Lemberg? And you heard Janet said maybe, not maybe not. Jewish last names were sometimes you had to pay for a last name if you wanted a nice last name. Otherwise, the free ones were pretty unattractive last names. It depends on uh, the town or the province that people were from. Uh, Alexander Biter is an author of many, many books on the origin of last names. And I have a pretty comprehensive collection of his books back at my home in Chapel Hill, and I'll be back there probably in early December. If you want me to look up the origin of your family's last name, I can certainly do that easily and send you a picture of what Dr. Biter says.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Um,
Oh, okay, thanks.
That wind means wind.
Or we could go over and break it. Just
yeah, you could just break in. You could or I can give you the garage code and that you could avoid breaking in.
We can have our next meeting there.
Okay.
I just had in the United States, when you get married, you can have either a civil or a religious ceremony, and they are both recognized as legal entities because someone in my family got married and they had a civil ceremony. They did not have a religious ceremony. They got to and the male wanted to get remarried, and his fiance was very religious, and she insists gets a get, even though he never had a religious ceremony. But she would, my question, what I'm just saying that's different here, that they are both recognized. Am I correct? Or does each state have individual requirements as to what is a legal
They're
marriage?
not actually, the religious ones are separate. What's different is that all of our rabbis are officiants. They have become registered officiants because we have separate ceremonies. We have to sign a marriage certificate, which they sign legally, and we also sign the ketubah, which they sign religiously. So both are happening. The engagement process happens in the ceremony. When we put the ring on the finger, we're also legally committing to engagement. 2 seconds later, we get married when we move the ring. So we do all three.
But lots of people don't have any, they go to quote city hall to get married. That's totally a civil ceremony, and lots of the intermarriages, people don't want a religious ceremony. But that's recognized, so different from what we're talking about in Galicia, that most people did not have a civil ceremony, so therefore the children of that marriage were then were illegitimate because they didn't have a civil ceremony.
well, in the U.S., if you get a marriage license, you don't even need a ceremony. I assume you can just go down to City Hall and apply for a marriage license.
So, but that's considered a civil ceremony, not a religious ceremony.
Well, what's interesting in Israel, she mentioned they don't have civil, but what they do have is a workaround, which is they'll recognize marriages outside of Israel. And so secular Jews get married in Cyprus, and then they'll come back and they'll be formally recognized, but they cannot be married by rabbis. They sometimes have fake religious ceremonies where they're not actually being married, but it looks Jewish. I've been to several of my cousins' versions of that. They're not actually legally married Jewishly.
Yeah, I've heard that. You can only be married in an orphanage in Israel.
They will recognize your marriage outside. So they have.
I've never heard the word Jewish.
Thank you.
Jewish matter.
Well, I'm going to wrap things up here on Zoom because we're just at 3 o'clock. And I know you guys are going to have some fun there in Chapel Hill. You've got coffee to drink and probably some food to eat. I want to thank again Michelle and her husband for getting everything set up, and for Mike traveling from faraway Carrie to make sure things went well for Michelle. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in November. Again, even if you have used the Family Search website, the Mormon Church website, it's changed a lot in the last couple of years. So I encourage you to come and listen to our speaker who knows everything about Family Search and how to find Jewish records. One of the things that he discovered in his search as a Mormon was that he had Jewish ancestry. So I'm certainly interested in hearing a little bit about that story as well. So I want to thank you again from Evanston, Illinois to Chapel Hill and Raleigh and all of you kind folks. I hope you have a great afternoon and I'll see you next month.
Thank
you. Thank you all for coming.
Does
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Canadian